The blast furnace was running hot enough to melt God's own teeth, and I was too damn old to be babysitting it. 68 years on this earth, 43 of them in these mills, and here I am playing nursemaid to number 7 like some green kid fresh out of high school. Of course, there ain't no green kids left. Just me and maybe 8 other stubborn bastards who didn't have the sense to evacuate when the government boys came through with their clipboards and hazmat suits. Frank Calder, they call me. Used to be Foreman Calderback when Homestead Works employed half of Pittsburgh. Now I'm just Frank, the crazy son of a bitch who volunteered to stay behind and make gates. Steel gates. Big ones. Heavy ones. The kind that might actually keep those things on the other side where they belong. The radio crackled. Old Motorola unit that survived 3 plant closings and God knows how many safety inspections. Frank, you copy? This is Dennison. I grabbed the handset, wiping slag dust off my Carhartt jacket. Still had my name embroidered on it, though the stitching was coming loose. Sarah had done that for me, back when she still thought my job was something to be proud of instead of something that kept me away from dinner and Tommy's Little League games. Yeah, Mike, I copy. What's the word from the outside world? Same word as yesterday. Stay put, keep the furnaces running, and don't let nothing through that perimeter fence. Army Corps says they need another 100 gate sections before they can seal off Route 376. I looked out through the reinforced windows of the control room. The skeleton crew was down there, Jimmy Glint running the crane, his grandson Pete working the pore controls, Maria Santos checking temperatures on the continuous caster. All good people. All should have been home with their families instead of volunteering for this suicide mission. But here's the thing about steel workers, we don't abandon the mill. Even when the mill probably should have been abandoned 20 years ago, when the market went to hell and half the jobs moved to China. Even when the government comes through telling everyone to evacuate because of some biological containment situation that nobody wants to explain in plain English. The emergency alert system had been running the same message for 3 weeks now. Pittsburgh Industrial Zone under federal lockdown. Do not approach Homestead Works perimeter. Like we were some kind of toxic waste dump instead of the last functioning steel mill in western Pennsylvania. Dennison, you still there? Yeah, Frank. What they ain't telling us about this containment situation. Because I got eyes, and I seen those things moving around outside the fence. They don't look like no chemical spill to me. Static for a long moment. Then, above my pay grade, Frank. Just keep making the gates. I hung up the radio and walked back to the observation deck. Down below, Jimmy was positioning the crane for another pour. The ladle held maybe 15 tons of molten steel at 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to turn a man into vapor if he made one wrong move. Jimmy had been making the right moves for 36 years, though his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Neither were mine, come to think of it, but steady enough to run a steel mill, apparently. Even if it killed me. The intercom buzzed. Frank, we got movement on the south fence. That was Maria, sharp-eyed as always. Probably spotted trouble before the security cameras picked it up. I grabbed my binoculars, old Bushnell 10x50s that I'd bought at Dick's Sporting Goods back, when I still thought retirement might involve deer hunting instead of keeping monsters away from civilization. Through the chain link and razor wire, I could see them. Maybe 20 or 30, shuffling along the perimeter like they were testing for weak spots. Used to be people, from what I could tell. Still wore clothes anyway. Jeans, work shirts, sneakers. But they moved wrong, like their joints were coming loose. And their faces, well, I tried not to look at their faces too close. Just keep working, I called down to the floor. They can't get through that fence. Army Corps reinforced it with our own rebar. Course, I'd been telling my crew the same thing for 3 weeks, and every day there seemed to be more of them gathering outside. And every day, they seemed a little more organized, a little more focused on finding a way in. Pete looked up from the casting controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. Kid was maybe 25, should have been in college or starting a family, not stuck in a steel mill waiting for the world to end. Mr. Calder, my mom called this morning, said they're evacuating Monroeville now. That's 50 miles from here. Your mom's smart to get out while she can. She wanted to know when we're coming home. I didn't have an answer for that. Truth was, I wasn't sure we were going home. The government boys had made it pretty clear. This was a volunteer mission with no guaranteed extraction. Keep the furnaces running, make the gate sections, help them build their containment wall. After that depended on whether their wall actually worked. The furnace temperature alarm started beeping. I hustled back to the control panel, checking readings on the HMI screen. Temperature was climbing past optimal range, which meant we needed to adjust the oxygen flow or risk damaging the refractory lining. 40 years of muscle memory kicked in, and I had the system balanced again in under a minute. This was what I knew how to do. This was what I was good at: making steel, taking iron ore and coke and limestone and turning it into something useful, something strong, something that might actually save lives if we did it right. The radio crackled again. "Frank, this is Colonel Hayes, Army Corps of Engineers." Military voice. Direct, no nonsense. I dealt with Army Corps before on environmental compliance stuff. They usually knew what they were talking about, even if they didn't always explain it in ways regular people could understand. "Colonel, this is Frank Calder, Mill Foreman. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Calder, we're expediting the gate production schedule. We need your current inventory delivered to the staging area by 0800 tomorrow, and we need you to continue production through the weekend." "Weekend's not a problem, Colonel, but moving inventory while we're in production, that's going to be tricky. These gates weigh 8 tons each, and we only got one crane crew." "Understood. We're sending additional personnel to assist with loading and transport." Additional personnel. That was code for soldiers, most likely, which meant the situation outside our little steel bubble was getting worse, not better. "Colonel, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Mr. Calder." "These gates we're making, they're going to hold, right? Whatever's on the other side, they're going to keep it there?" Long pause. Then, "Mr. Calder, your gates are the strongest containment system we've been able to manufacture. If they don't hold, nothing will." That wasn't exactly the reassuring answer I'd been hoping for, but it was honest, which I could respect. After I signed off, I walked down to the production floor. Jimmy was guiding another pour, and the molten steel flowed like liquid sunlight into the casting molds. Beautiful in its way. Pure chemistry and physics and human skill turning raw materials into something civilization could use. Maria looked up from her temperature readings. "Frank, we're burning through our limestone reserves faster than expected. At this rate, we'll be out by Tuesday. I'll call Dennison. Army Corps can arrange for more supplies." What if they can't? What if they can't? That was the question none of us wanted to ask out loud. What if the supply lines failed? What if the containment wall didn't work? What if those things outside figured out how to get through our fence? What if we were just postponing the inevitable? I looked around at my crew, good people doing dangerous work because someone needed to do it. Because that's what steel workers do. We show up. We do the job. We make the things that keep civilization running, even when civilization seems to be falling apart. But it was more than that, wasn't it? This mill wasn't just where I worked. It was what I was. 43 years of my life poured into these furnaces, my sweat mixed with the slag, my blood offering to the steel gods. Sarah used to say I loved this place more than I loved her, and maybe she was right. Maybe that's why she left. Maybe that's why Tommy stopped calling. The mill never left, though. The mill never disappointed me or asked for things I couldn't give. The mill just needed what I had, my knowledge, my hands, my devotion. And in return, it gave me purpose. Steel. Strength. Something that would outlast flesh and bone. "Then we figure something else out," I told Maria. "That's what we always do." The blast furnace roared, and another batch of molten steel began its journey toward becoming something useful. Something strong. Something that might just save us all. The Army Corps trucks rolled in at 0500, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searchlights at a prison. I was already up, had been since 0330, checking overnight production logs and making sure the furnaces were running clean. Old habits. Sarah used to say I was married to the mill, and she wasn't wrong. Difference was, now the mill might be the only thing keeping me alive. Colonel Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle, a desert tan Humvee that looked out of place against the rust-red brick of the mill buildings. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of bearing that said he'd been giving orders long enough that people listened. Behind him came a squad of soldiers in full gear, plus 2 civilian types in hard hats and safety vests. "Mr. Calder." Hayes extended a hand. Firm grip, callous palms. Working man's hands, despite the officer's bars. "Colonel James Hayes, Army Corps of Engineers. We spoke yesterday. Frank Calder. Welcome to Homestead Works." I nodded toward the soldiers, who were already spreading out to secure the loading area. "Your boys look like they're expecting trouble. We're hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. Standard operating procedure in a containment zone." Containment zone. There was that phrase again, like we were dealing with a chemical spill instead of whatever the hell those things were outside our fence. Colonel, I've been running steel mills for 4 decades. I know when people are dancing around the truth. What exactly are we containing here? Hayes studied me for a moment, probably trying to decide how much to tell a civilian contractor. The 2 civilian types, engineers, from the look of their clipboards and measuring equipment, were already examining the finished gate sections we had stacked in the loading area. Mr. Calder, 3 weeks ago, a CDC research facility outside Morgantown experienced a catastrophic containment breach. The pathogen, it affects human nervous system function. Severely. Pathogen? You mean like a virus? Prion-based, actually. Similar to CJD, but much more aggressive. Symptoms include loss of higher brain function, increased aggression, and… Hayes paused. Enhanced physical durability. Enhanced physical durability. That was a hell of a way to describe what I'd seen shambling around our perimeter fence. But at least now I had some idea what we were dealing with. How long do we have? Current epidemiological models suggest the infection will reach critical mass in the eastern U.S. within 6 months. These containment barriers, he gestured toward our gate sections, represent our best chance of establishing defensible perimeters around major population centers. 6 months. Christ. I'd been thinking this was a temporary assignment, maybe a few weeks of emergency production before the government got their act together and solved the problem. But 6 months meant winter production, meant keeping the furnaces running through December and January, when natural gas costs went through the roof, and every day was a battle against frozen pipes and equipment failure. Colonel, we're going to need more supplies. A lot more. And probably more crew. Crew won't be a problem. We're authorizing hazard pay at triple overtime rates, plus federal survivor benefits for families. As for supplies, Hayes pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what looked like logistics reports. We've identified alternate supply chains for raw materials. Rail transport is still functioning on most eastern routes. Most eastern routes, which meant some routes were already compromised. Jimmy's voice crackled over the intercom from the crane operator's booth. Frank, we got movement on the north fence. More than usual. I grabbed my binoculars and climbed up to the elevated loading platform, where I could see over the mill buildings. Sure enough, there was a crowd gathering along the northern perimeter. Maybe 100 of them, pressed up against the chain link like they were waiting for something. They do that sometimes, I told Hayes. Gather in groups, almost like they're communicating. Hayes had his own binoculars out, military-grade optics that probably cost more than I made in a month. Intelligence suggests they retain some primitive problem-solving capability. Pattern recognition. Possibly rudimentary planning. Planning? That was a disturbing thought. Planning what? Unknown. But they've been observed coordinating attacks on other containment barriers. Testing weak points. Exploiting structural vulnerabilities. I thought about our fence, 12 feet of chain link topped with razor wire, reinforced with our own steel rebar and backed by concrete barriers. Strong enough to keep out trespassers and curious teenagers. But if those things could plan, could work together, how long have the other barriers held? Hayes lowered his binoculars. Average failure time is 18 days. 18 days. We'd already been here for 21. Down on the production floor, Maria was running temperature checks on the continuous caster, making notes on her clipboard with the methodical precision that had made her the best shift supervisor we'd ever had. Pete was adjusting the oxygen flow to furnace number 7, following procedures I'd taught him the same way my old foreman had taught me back in 1978. Good people doing good work. People who deserved to know what they were really up against. Colonel, my crew needs to hear this. All of it. Mr. Calder, operational security. Operational security, my ass. These people are risking their lives to make your gates. They've got a right to know why. Hayes considered this, glancing at his tablet again. Finally, agreed. But the information doesn't leave this facility. I called everyone together in the break room, same cramped space where we'd held safety meetings and birthday parties, and the occasional heated discussion about overtime schedules. The coffee was still terrible, burned and bitter from sitting too long on the hot plate. Some things never changed, even when the world was ending. Jimmy, Pete, Maria, and the other 5 crew members crowded around the metal table, hard hats in their hands, steel-toed boots scuffed with slag dust. Hayes stood at the front of the room like he was briefing officers instead of steelworkers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Colonel Hayes, Army Corps of Engineers. I'm here to provide you with a mission briefing. Mission briefing. Like we were soldiers instead of mill workers who'd volunteered to stay behind because someone had to keep the furnaces running. Hayes explained the situation, the CDC breach, the pathogen, the containment strategy. Used a lot of technical terms that boiled down to the world was going to hell, and we were making the doors to keep hell from spreading. Pete raised his hand like he was in school. Colonel, what happens to us after we finish making the gates? Extraction protocols are still being finalized. But I want to be clear, your safety is a priority. We won't abandon you here. Maria leaned forward. What about our families? They're in the evacuation zones. Families of essential personnel receive priority placement in secured areas. Your loved ones are safe. I hoped that was true. I hoped it wasn't just the kind of thing officers said to keep morale up while the situation went to hell around them. Any other questions? Jimmy cleared his throat. Colonel, those gates we're making, how do we know they'll hold? I mean, if these things can plan and coordinate. Hayes looked at me, then back at Jimmy. Mr. Glint, these barriers represent the strongest containment system we've been able to engineer. High-tensile steel, reinforced foundations, integrated monitoring systems. If they fail, he paused. If they fail, we'll have to consider more extreme options. More extreme options. That sounded ominous as hell. After Hayes left with his convoy of trucks loaded with our gate sections, I found myself standing in the control room, staring out at the crowd that had gathered along our fence line. They weren't trying to climb over anymore, weren't testing the wire. They were just standing there, waiting, like they knew something we didn't. The radio crackled. Frank, this is Dennison. You there? Yeah, Mike. What's the word? Word is we're gonna have company. Government types coming in tomorrow for some kind of inspection. You're supposed to give them full cooperation. What kind of inspection? Above my pay grade, Frank. Just be careful what you say. And maybe don't mention that conversation you had with the colonel today. The line went dead. I looked out at the crowd again. Still waiting. Still watching. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wondered if we were really the ones in charge of this situation, or if we were just another part of someone else's plan. The government inspection team arrived in black SUVs, not Army Corps trucks, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of inspection this was going to be. 3 suits climbed out, 2 men and a woman, all carrying briefcases and wearing the kind of serious expressions that meant somebody's day was about to get a whole lot worse. I met them at the main gate, hard hat on, safety glasses hanging from my neck like always. Professional courtesy, even when I had a bad feeling about what they wanted. Mr. Calder? The lead suit was maybe 50, gray hair, expensive shoes that had never seen the inside of a steel mill. I'm Director Walsh, Department of Homeland Security. These are my associates, Agent Hart and Agent Rodriguez. Homeland Security. Christ. This kept getting better. What can I do for you, Director? We're here to conduct a security assessment of your facility. Standard procedure for critical infrastructure in containment zones. Standard procedure. Right. Like there was anything standard about any of this. I led them through the mill, explaining our production process, safety protocols, inventory management. They took notes, asked questions about our security measures, our communication systems, our personnel files. Professional stuff mostly, but I could feel them watching my crew, evaluating, judging. When we reached the blast furnace control room, Walsh stopped and stared out at the production floor for a long moment. Jimmy was running another pour, 15 tons of molten steel flowing like liquid fire into the casting molds. Beautiful and dangerous, same as always. Impressive operation, Mr. Calder. How long would it take to shut down production if necessary? Shut down? You mean emergency shutdown? I mean complete cessation of operations. Furnace cooling, equipment mothballing, personnel evacuation. I didn't like where this was going. Director, that would take at least 48 hours to do safely. These furnaces run at 2,900 degrees. You can't just flip a switch and walk away. Agent Hart made a note on his tablet. What about emergency protocols? Rapid shutdown procedures? Rapid shutdown of a blast furnace means destroying it. Molten steel solidifies in the runners, the refractory lining cracks from thermal shock. You're looking at $50 million in damage minimum. But it could be done? I looked at Walsh, then at his 2 associates. They weren't asking hypothetical questions. They were planning something. Director, what's really going on here? Walsh closed his briefcase with a sharp click. Mr. Calder, there are contingency plans being developed. Scenarios where continued operations at this facility might pose an unacceptable risk. Risk to who? We're making the gates you people need for your containment walls. The situation is evolving. Strategic priorities may need to be reassessed. Strategic priorities. Government speak for. We might decide to cut you loose. After they left, I called Dennison on the radio. Took 3 tries to raise him, which was unusual. Mike was usually glued to that radio during business hours. Frank, thank God. We got problems. What kind of problems? Federal kind. They're talking about reclassifying Homestead Works as a potential contamination source. Something about thermal vectors and aerosol dispersion. Thermal vectors. They thought our furnaces might be spreading the infection somehow. Which was ridiculous. We had air filtration systems, emissions controls, environmental monitoring. But since when did reality stop the government from making stupid decisions? Mike, they want to shut us down. Worse than that, Frank. They want to neutralize the facility. Complete sterilization protocol. Sterilization protocol. I'd heard that phrase before, back when I was in the Army. It meant blowing things up and asking questions later. How long do we have? Best case? Maybe 48 hours. Frank, you need to get your people out of there. Now. I hung up the radio and called the crew together again. Same break room, same terrible coffee, but this time I was the one delivering bad news instead of Colonel Hayes. People, we got a situation. Government wants to shut down the mill. Permanently. Maria looked up from her coffee cup. What about the gates? They said they needed them for the containment walls. Apparently that's changed. Apparently we're now considered a security risk. Pete shook his head. This is bullshit, Mr. Calder. We've been busting our asses for 3 weeks, making their gates, following their rules. Now they want to throw us away like yesterday's newspaper. Jimmy stood up, his old joints creaking. Frank, what if we don't shut down? What if we keep running? Then we're in direct violation of federal orders. That's a felony, assuming they don't just declare us enemy combatants and skip the legal niceties. But even as I said it, I was thinking about it. We had maybe 100 gate sections in inventory, enough to fortify a significant perimeter. We had raw materials for maybe 2 weeks of additional production. We had skilled workers who knew how to run every piece of equipment in the mill. And we had something else. We had 15 tons of molten steel at 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit, running through systems designed to contain and channel incredible amounts of thermal energy. If those things outside our fence ever made it through, if the government decided to abandon us, if the whole damn world went to hell, well, we'd have options. Mr. Calder? Maria was looking at me with those sharp eyes of hers. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we keep running until someone physically stops us. We make more gates. We follow the original mission parameters. And if Homeland Security comes back with a shutdown order? I looked around the room at these good people, steel workers who'd volunteered to stay behind because someone had to do the job. People who deserved better than being abandoned by bureaucrats who'd never worked a day in their lives. Then we remind them that this is still America, and Americans don't quit just because the job gets dangerous. Pete grinned. Hell yes, Mr. Calder. Let's make some steel. But as we walked back to the production floor, I could see the crowd outside our fence had grown again. Maybe 200 of them now, pressed against the chain link like they were waiting for something. Like they knew our time was running out. The blast furnace roared, and another pour began. 15 tons of molten steel, bright as the sun, flowing toward the casting molds. Beautiful and dangerous, same as always. But this time, I found myself wondering if we might need to use that steel for something other than gates. The first explosion came at 0347 hours, bright enough to light up the entire mill complex like daylight. I was in the control room, catching a few hours of sleep in the chair, old habit from the days when we ran 3 shifts and someone always had to be watching the furnaces. The blast threw me to the floor and set off every alarm we had. Emergency lighting kicked in as I scrambled to my feet, checking systems on the HMI displays. Furnace temperatures were holding steady, but we'd lost power to the north loading bay. Through the reinforced windows, I could see flames shooting up from what used to be the main electrical transformer. The intercom crackled with Jimmy's voice from the crane operator's booth. Frank, you okay up there? I'm fine. What the hell happened? Explosion in the electrical yard. Looks like sabotage. I saw figures moving around out there before it blew. Sabotage. The government bastards had decided not to wait for us to comply voluntarily. I grabbed the radio handset. Mike, this is Frank. You copy? Static. Dennison, come in. More static. They'd cut our communications. Maria's voice came over the intercom from the production floor. Frank, we got movement on all sides. Looks like the fence is compromised. I raised my binoculars and looked out over the mill grounds. The explosion had blown a hole in the northern perimeter fence, and those things were streaming through like water through a burst dam. Hundreds of them, moving with more coordination than I'd ever seen before. And behind them, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, I could see vehicles. Government vehicles. The bastards were using the infection as cover for their sterilization protocol. The intercom buzzed again. Pete this time, voice tight with fear. Mr. Calder, they're at the south entrance. And they're not alone, there's people with them. People in hazmat suits. People in hazmat suits. Cleanup crew most likely. Here to make sure nobody lived to tell the story of how Homestead works got shut down. I made a decision that probably saved our lives and definitely changed everything that came after. All personnel, this is Frank. We're going to siege protocol. Lock down all entrances, seal the air systems, and keep those furnaces running. We're not going down without a fight. Siege protocol wasn't an official procedure. It was something we joked about during safety meetings. The idea that the mill was so well built you could hold off an army from inside the blast furnace building. Thick concrete walls, multiple levels, and enough thermal energy to melt anything that tried to get through the doors. But I'd never thought we'd actually have to do it. Jimmy was already moving, using the overhead crane to position finished gate sections across the main entrances like improvised barricades. Each section weighed 8 tons and was designed to withstand tremendous pressure. Not bulletproof, maybe, but close enough. Maria had sealed the air intake systems and switched us over to emergency ventilation. The mill building was essentially airtight now, with its own air supply and filtration. We could probably last days in here if we had to. Pete was at the furnace controls, maintaining optimal temperature and pressure. Good kid. Steady hands, even with hell breaking loose outside. The other crew members, Rodriguez, Murphy, Hart, Washington, Glint Jr., were taking positions at the observation windows, ready to report on movement outside. All good people. All people who deserved to live through this nightmare. The first wave hit the main entrance at 0400. I heard the impact through 3 feet of concrete and steel, something heavy slamming into our improvised barricade. Then another impact and another. Frank, Jimmy called from the crane booth. They're using some kind of battering ram. Military-grade stuff. Through the blast-resistant windows, I could see them. The infected ones were being herded forward by people in full hazmat gear, used as a living shield while the cleanup crew set up their equipment. Efficient. Cold-blooded. Exactly what I'd expect from government types who decided we were expendable. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought we were just mill workers, not soldiers. I'd been in the army before I came to work for the steel company. Served 2 tours in Iraq, back when that was the hot war instead of whatever this thing was. I knew how to fight. More importantly, I knew how to think like someone who wanted to kill me. Pete, can you jury-rig the pore controls for manual operation? Sure, Mr. Calder. But why? Because we're going to turn this mill into the world's biggest weapon. The blast furnace held 15 tons of molten steel at 2,900 degrees. The runners and ladles were designed to channel that steel precisely into casting molds. But with some creative plumbing and a complete disregard for safety protocols, we could redirect that flow anywhere we wanted. Like toward the main entrance, where our unwelcome visitors were trying to break down our defenses. Jimmy, I need you to move that crane over to the emergency release position. We're going to open the tap on furnace 7. Frank, that's crazy. You open that tap without proper containment, and molten steel goes everywhere. That's the idea. It took 20 minutes to rig the system. 20 minutes of listening to the battering ram slam into our barricades, of watching infected bodies pile up against the entrance like cordwood, of knowing that any second now our defenses would give way, and we'd be fighting hand-to-hand against things that used to be human. But steel workers are good at improvising. We took the emergency release valve, bypassed the safety interlocks, and ran a temporary runner from the furnace tap to the main entrance. Not pretty, not safe, definitely not OSHA-approved. But it would work. Everyone get back from the entrance. I called over the intercom. Way back. This is gonna get hot. I opened the tap. 15 tons of molten steel, bright as the surface of the sun, came roaring down the improvised runner like liquid death. It hit the concrete floor and spread out in a wave of superheated metal, flowing under the barricaded entrance and beyond. The screaming started immediately. Through the observation windows, I could see the hazmat-suited figures scrambling back from the entrance, their equipment abandoned, their infected shield wall suddenly a lot less useful as molten steel flowed around their feet. The battering ram stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, there was blessed silence. Then the radio in the control room, the one connected to the mill's external antenna, crackled to life. "Homestead works. This is Colonel Hayes, Army Corps of Engineers. Please respond." I grabbed the handset. "Colonel, this is Frank Calder. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Calder, we have reports of an incident at your facility. Are you and your crew safe?" "Safe as we can be, considering someone just tried to kill us." "That was not an authorized operation. Mr. Calder, there are elements within the government that believe your facility represents a contamination risk. They've taken unauthorized action to neutralize that risk." "Unauthorized action? Like that made it better." "Colonel, I got 8 good people in here with me, and we're sitting on enough molten steel to melt half of Pittsburgh. Anyone else tries to neutralize us, they're going to find out what 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit does to hazmat suits." "Mr. Calder, I need you to listen carefully. The situation has changed. The Eastern Containment Line has failed. We're implementing fallback protocols, and we need your facility operational. Can you continue production?" I looked out at the mill floor, where my crew was already cleaning up our improvised weapon system and preparing to resume normal operations. Good people, professionals, the kind of folks who could turn a steel mill into a fortress and then go back to making gates like nothing had happened. "Colonel, we can keep making gates, but I want guarantees. Written guarantees that no more cleanup crews show up at my door." "You have my word, Mr. Calder." "With respect, Colonel, your word isn't worth much if you can't control your own people. I want authorization to defend this facility by any means necessary, and I want extraction guarantees for my crew when this is over." Long pause. Then, agreed. "Mr. Calder, you're now operating under military authority as a critical defense installation. Use whatever force is necessary to maintain operations." I hung up the radio and walked out onto the production floor, where Jimmy was already repositioning the crane for another pour. The furnaces were running hot and clean, ready to produce another batch of gate sections. Through the blast-resistant windows, I could see the infected crowd still pressed against our fence. But the hazmat-suited figures were gone, probably regrouping for another attempt. Let them come. We had molten steel, and we knew how to use it. "All right, people," I called out to my crew. "Let's make some gates, and let's make sure nobody gets in our way." The blast furnace roared, and another pour began. Beautiful, dangerous, and now officially weaponized. Just the way we liked it. The call came through at 1,400 hours, 3 days after we'd turned the main entrance into a pool of hardened steel and government agents into very expensive scrap metal. Colonel Hayes' voice was tight, professional, but I could hear something underneath it. Fear, maybe, or just exhaustion from fighting a war that nobody could win. "Mr. Calder, we need to discuss your final mission parameters." "Final mission parameters? That didn't sound good." "Go ahead, Colonel." "The situation has deteriorated beyond our worst-case projections. Pittsburgh is being overrun. The infection has reached the suburbs. We're implementing the last resort containment protocol." I looked out through the reinforced windows at the crowd pressed against our fence. Maybe 500 of them now, more arriving every hour. They'd been testing the perimeter for days, probing for weak spots, working together in ways that suggested whatever was left of their human intelligence was adapting, learning. "What's the protocol, Colonel?" "Complete urban containment. We're going to seal the entire Pittsburgh metropolitan area, using your gate sections as the primary barrier system. Create a buffer zone between the infected population and the uncontaminated regions to the west. Complete urban containment. That meant writing off the entire city. 2.5 million people, give or take. Of course, most of those people were probably already infected, or dead, or evacuated. But still, it was my city, my home. How many gates do you need? Every section you can produce in the next 48 hours. After that, the perimeter will be sealed from the outside. Permanently. Permanently." There it was. The truth we'd all been avoiding for weeks. "Colonel, what about extraction?" "You said." "Mr. Calder, there is no extraction." "I'm sorry. The best we can do is supply drops, medical support, whatever we can get through before the final seal. but anyone inside the perimeter stays inside. I set down the radio and walked out onto the production floor. My crew was there, all 8 of them, good people who'd volunteered to stay behind because someone had to do the job. They looked up at me with faces that said they already knew what I was going to tell them. People, I just got word from Colonel Hayes. We got 48 hours to produce as many gate sections as we can. After that, I paused, looking at each of them in turn. After that, we're on our own. Jimmy nodded slowly. Figured as much. Government types always cut and run when things get rough. Maria was checking her temperature readings, same as always. Steady hands, focused on the work. How many sections can we realistically produce in 48 hours? If we push the furnaces to maximum output, maybe 30 sections. That's working around the clock, no breaks, everything running at the red line. Pete looked up from the casting controls. Mr. Calder, what happens after we make the gates? I mean, what happens to us? What happens to us? The question I'd been asking myself for days. We keep running the mill. Make whatever steel we can with the supplies we have. Maybe the infection burns itself out. Maybe the government changes their minds. Maybe something else happens that nobody's thought of yet. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was the only one I had. Or, Jimmy said quietly, we make sure that if we're going down, we take as many of those bastards with us as we can. That was Jimmy. Practical to the end. We ran 3 shifts over the next 48 hours, pushing every piece of equipment to its absolute limit. The blast furnace ran so hot it started damaging the refractory lining. The continuous caster was cycling so fast the bearings started overheating. The crane was moving so much steel that Jimmy had to jury-rig the hydraulic system twice. But we made our 30 gate sections, plus 10 more that we kept for ourselves, just in case. The Army Corps trucks came for the last pickup at 0600 on day 2. Colonel Hayes was there personally, which I appreciated. Most officers would have sent subordinates for the dirty work. Mr. Calder. He offered his hand, same firm grip as before. But his eyes were different, older. I want you to know that what you and your people have accomplished here, it matters. These gates will save lives. How many lives, Colonel? Potentially millions. The Western Containment line should hold indefinitely with these barriers in place. Should hold, not will hold. What about the people inside the containment zone? Hayes was quiet for a moment, watching his soldiers load the gate sections onto flatbed trucks. Each section represented hours of skilled labor, tons of raw materials, the kind of precision work that you couldn't just replace with machines. There are survivor enclaves scattered throughout the affected areas. Isolated communities, military installations, research facilities. We'll do what we can to support them with supply drops and medical aid. But they were on their own, same as us. After the trucks left, I stood in the control room and watched the sun come up over the Monongahela River. Beautiful morning. Clear skies, no wind, perfect weather for making steel. If you didn't look too close at the crowds of infected people wandering around outside our fence, you could almost pretend everything was normal. Almost. The intercom buzzed. Maria's voice. Frank, we're getting some kind of organized movement out there. Looks like they're massing for an assault on the south gate. I raised my binoculars. She was right. Maybe 1,000 of them, moving with coordinated purpose toward the weakest point in our perimeter. They'd been watching us, learning our routines, figuring out our vulnerabilities. Smart. Scary as hell, but smart. All personnel, this is Frank. Looks like our visitors are getting impatient. Implement siege protocol. Seal all entrances, switch to emergency ventilation, and prepare for extended combat operations. Extended combat operations. Listen to me, talking like a general instead of a mill foreman. But then again, maybe that's what I was now. The last mill foreman in Pittsburgh, commanding a fortress made of concrete and steel and 40 years of industrial expertise. The first wave hit our south gate at 1,030 hours. They came in coordinated groups, using the bodies of the freshly infected as shields, while the older ones, the ones who'd been changed longer, directed the assault with tactical precision that would have impressed a military planner. But we were ready for them. Pete had rigged the poor controls for rapid response, and we had runners positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. When the infected broke through the first layer of fencing, we opened the taps on furnaces 6 and 7 simultaneously. 30 tons of molten steel, channeled through our improvised weapon system, flowing out across the mill grounds like liquid death. The screaming lasted for maybe 30 seconds. Then silence. That's when Pete saw her. "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ, no." His voice came over the intercom, broken and raw. I grabbed my binoculars and followed his line of sight. There, at the edge of the hardened steel flow, was a woman in a pink cardigan and house slippers. Gray hair, maybe 70 years old, moving with the jerky, unnatural gait of the infected. But her face, even from this distance, I could see Pete's eyes and her features. "Pete, get back from that window." "That's my mom, Mr. Calder." She was supposed to be at the evacuation center. How did she get here?" The woman, Pete's mother, was trying to navigate around the pool of cooling steel, her movements growing more coordinated as she focused on the mill building. Her head turned toward our position with mechanical precision, and even through the reinforced glass, I could feel the weight of her stare. "She followed the evacuation route," Maria said quietly. "They all did. Every evacuation led them here." Pete was already moving toward the equipment access door, the one that led out to the loading platform. I caught his arm. "Son, that's not your mother anymore. She's hurt, Mr. Calder. Look at her hand, it's all torn up. She needs help." "Pete, listen to me. That thing out there, it's wearing your mother's face, but it's not her. You understand?" He looked at me with eyes that were coming apart, and I saw something that scared me more than all the infected in Pittsburgh. I saw a good man breaking. I can't just leave her out there." "Yes, you can, because that's what she'd want. Your real mother, the one who raised you, she'd want you to live." The woman outside had made it around the steel flow and was now pressing against the main entrance, her ruined hands scraping at the metal barricade. Her mouth was moving, but no sound came through the reinforced walls. Pete was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. "She's trying to say something, Mr. Calder." "No, she's not. She's just responding to stimuli, like a machine." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was wrong. The way she moved, the way she'd navigated around our defenses, the way she'd found us out of all the places she could have gone. There was something left in there, something that remembered. The woman suddenly stopped scratching at the barricade and looked up directly at the control room window where we stood. For just a moment, her face changed. The mechanical blankness flickered, and I saw something that might have been recognition. Pete made a sound like a wounded animal and bolted for the access door. I tackled him before he could reach it, both of us going down hard on the concrete floor. He fought me with desperate strength, trying to get to that door, trying to get to what was left of his mother. "Let me go. She needs help. She needs to be put out of her misery," I said, pinning him down. "And if you go out there, you'll end up just like her." Jimmy's voice came over the intercom. "Frank, we got more movement. Lot more. That incident seems to have attracted attention." Through the window, I could see them streaming through the breach in our fence. Dozens at first, then hundreds. And at the front of the horde, still pressed against our barricade, was Pete's mother in her pink cardigan, leading them. For now. The radio crackled. "Homestead works, this is Falcon Base. Colonel Hayes here. We're monitoring your situation via satellite. How are you holding up?" "We're holding, Colonel. But they're getting smarter, more organized. Next time, they'll probably find a way around our defenses." "Mr. Calder, I'm authorized to offer you one final option. We have a fast attack helicopter on standby. We can extract your crew, get you out of there before the situation deteriorates further." I looked around the control room at the gauges and displays that had been my life for 4 decades. Temperature readings, pressure sensors, flow rates, all the numbers that told the story of how raw materials became something useful, something strong. But something was wrong with the numbers. They kept shifting. Not the readings themselves, but the way I was seeing them. Like my eyes were having trouble focusing. "What about the mill, Colonel?" "The mill gets sealed with everything else. Becomes part of the containment zone." Part of the containment zone. After 40 years of making steel, after turning this place into a fortress that could withstand anything, they wanted me to just walk away and let it become a monument to failure. "Colonel, I appreciate the offer. But this is my mill. My crew. We built something here that's worth defending. Mr. Calder. Besides, someone needs to keep making steel. Even in hell, people need gates." I hung up the radio and walked out onto the production floor, where my crew was preparing for the next assault. Jimmy was positioning crane loads of molten metal over strategic choke points, his movements unnaturally precise, almost mechanical. Maria was monitoring furnace temperatures and adjusting the oxygen flow for maximum heat output, her head twitching slightly to the left every few seconds like she was listening to something none of us could hear. Pete was calibrating the pour controls for rapid-fire operation, his fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of perfect coordination that I'd never seen before. Too perfect, like he wasn't having to think about what he was doing. Good people doing dangerous work, because that's what needed to be done. But something was wrong. Something I didn't want to acknowledge, even to myself. "People," I called out. "We got an offer for helicopter extraction. Anyone wants to take it, no judgment. You've done your job here." They looked at each other, then at me. Their movements were synchronized in a way that seemed practiced, like they'd rehearsed this moment. Jimmy spoke for all of them. "Frank, we didn't come this far to give up now. This mill is our home. These bastards want it, they can come and take it." Through the reinforced windows, I could see another crowd massing at the north gate. Maybe 2,000 this time. They'd learned from the last assault, spreading out to minimize casualties from our molten steel weapons. But as I watched them, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They were moving in the same synchronized patterns as my crew. "All right, people, let's show them what happens when you mess with steel workers." The blast furnace roared, and another batch of molten metal began flowing toward the casting position. But this time, we weren't making gates. We were making war. The final battle for Homestead Works was about to begin, and we intended to win it, even if we were the only ones left standing when the steel cooled. The end. Emergency alert system, final transmission. Emergency alert, Pittsburgh containment zone sealed. Emergency alert, Homestead Works status, operational. Final operational note, mill continues producing steel sections for internal fortification. Crew of 8 maintains defensive positions. Estimated supplies sufficient for 3 to 6 months continued operation. Furnaces remain active. Personal log, day 23. Something is wrong with our air filtration system. Keep hearing clicking sounds in the vents. Crew coordination has improved significantly, moving in perfect sync without discussion. Very efficient. Maria suggested we start night shifts. Makes sense. Don't feel tired anymore. Personal log, day 24. Pete's mother never left the perimeter. Still out there, watching the mill. Noticed my hands shake less during precision work, steadier than they've been in years. Jimmy completed complex crane operation in complete darkness. Remarkable improvement in motor skills. Maria's breathing sounds different, deeper, with a metallic rasp. Personal log, day 25. Furnace 7 running hotter than readings indicate, but crew agrees readings are accurate. Eyes adjusting to mill conditions, can see heat signatures now. Pete says he can hear his mother calling from outside, but intercoms show no audio pickup. Maria asked me to look at something on her neck. Small holes, perfectly round like drill bits. Said they don't hurt. Personal log, day 26. Crew developed efficient gesture-based coordination. No wasted motion. Perfect timing on all operations. Maria's neck holes are spreading down her spine in neat rows. She says they help her breathe the heat better. Notice similar holes appearing on Jimmy's arms, perfectly spaced like rivet patterns. Personal log, day 27. Sleep cycles reduced to 2 to 3 hours maximum. Furnaces need constant monitoring. Team functions optimally with minimal rest. The holes aren't holes anymore, they're vents. Maria demonstrated by holding her hand near her neck holes during a pour. Hot air streams out of them, perfectly synchronized with furnace rhythm. Adaptation to industrial environment. Personal log, day 28. Colonel Hayes requesting status updates. Hard to remember why external contact matters. Mill operations self-sufficient now. Core temperature rising in my chest. Can feel small perforations forming along my ribs. Natural cooling system developing. Jimmy's holes whistle in harmony with the furnace draft. Personal log, day 29. Frank Calder reporting. Homestead Works operational. Steel production continuous. Crew modifications proceeding as expected. Integration with facility infrastructure approaching completion. Breathing through skin now more efficient than lungs. Bodies adapting to serve the mill. Day 30, steel flows. We flow. Same patterns. Same purpose. Holes opening along spine. Can taste the furnace heat through them. Day 31, no longer require verbal coordination. Understanding direct through proximity. Holes form perfect grids now. Air intake. Heat exhaust. Optimal thermal regulation. Day 32, perimeter secured. External threats neutralized. Internal modifications successful. Crew functioning as integrated components. Final status, mill operational. Crew operational. Heat exchange efficient. Steel production, uninterrupted. End transmission.